During Sultanate period of more than 300 years, 5 ruling dynasties dominated the political scene of the country. In this chapter, we will study the following concepts. 1. Mamluk Sultans. 2. KHALJI Sultans. 3. The TUGLAQ dynasty. 4. The SAYYID and LODHI dynasty. 5. Life and culture under Delhi Sultanate. The Sultans of Delhi. The rulers of the Delhi Sultanate, who reigned during the period 1206 to 1526 CE, left a permanent mark on the canvas of Indian history. During this period of more than 300 years, 5 ruling dynasties dominated the political scene of the country. These dynasties were the Slave Kings 1206 to 1290 CE, the KHALJIs 1290 to 1320 CE, the TUGLAQs 1320 to 1414 CE, the SAYYIDs 1414 to 1451 CE, and the LODHIs 1451 to 1526 CE. Mamluk Sultans. Qutbuddin Aibak, in actual fact, ruled India for only 4 years. Aibak had been sold as a slave in his childhood and, after passing through a few hands, was finally purchased by Sultan Muhammad Ghori. His master soon noticed his efficiency and gave him responsible posts. Qutbuddin Aibak is known as the founder of the slave dynasty or Mamluk dynasty. Mamluk means a slave who was born of free parents. They were called slave rulers because 3 sultans, Qutbuddin, Iltutmish, and Balban, were themselves once slaves. After Ghori's death, Aibak set up an independent kingdom with its headquarters in Lahore. He thus laid the foundation of the Delhi Sultanate. He was the first independent Sultanate ruler in India. He was very generous. His practice of giving away large sums of money in charity gained him the title of Lakh Baksh, that is, the giver of lakhs. He built 2 great mosques, one at Delhi called the Quwwatul Islam, Power of Islam, and another at Ajmer called Adhai Din Ka Jhopra. Aibak made no fresh conquests as he was busy in consolidating his rule in the conquered territories. He did not even attempt to set up a sound system of administration. His rule was purely military in nature. He also started the construction of the famous Qutub Minar at Delhi, but the work was completed by Iltutmish. One day, in 1210 CE, while playing polo, Qutbuddin fell off his horse and was killed. Iltutmish 1210 to 1236 CE. Qutbuddin was succeeded by Iltutmish 1210 to 1236 CE. Shams-ud-Din Iltutmish was born of Turkish parents belonging to the Ilbari tribe of Central Asia. After the death of Qutbuddin, the nobles of Delhi invited Iltutmish, the governor of Badayun, to come to Delhi. Iltutmish reached Delhi and assumed sovereign powers. He made Delhi his capital. He devoted the first 10 years of his reign to securing his power and position. Iltutmish had to face serious troubles from his rival Turkish nobles who had been prominent in political and military affairs. Iltutmish was a great builder. He completed the construction of the Qutub Minar in Delhi, which was started by Qutbuddin Aibak. He also built a magnificent mosque at Badayun and his own mausoleum in red sandstone at Delhi. Razia Sultana 1236 to 1240 CE. Before his death, Iltutmish had nominated his daughter Razia as his successor. However, some Turkish nobles were unwilling to accept a woman as their sovereign. The nobles accused her of showing undue favors to an Abyssinian noble, Jalaluddin Yaqut. All these factors gave the nobles an excuse for revolt. Nasiruddin Mahmud 1246 to 1266 CE. After the death of Razia Sultan, there was political chaos and confusion in the country. Two rulers, Bahram and Masood, came to the throne. They proved to be worthless, and eventually Nasiruddin Mahmud, the younger son of Iltutmish, was raised to the throne. Ghiyasuddin Balban 1266 to 1286 CE. In 1266, Nasiruddin died, and Balban became the undisputed Sultan of Delhi after a hard struggle against his enemies. He ruled as king for 20 years from 1266 to 1286 CE. Balban had to face many hardships as the prime minister as well as the Sultan. His own Turkish nobles, called the 40, hatched conspiracies against him. The Rajput chiefs also had not been completely subdued. The Mongol invasions had also become a great danger to the safety of the empire, but Balban faced all these difficulties boldly. During Sultanate period of more than 300 years, 5 ruling dynasties dominated the political scene of the country. In this chapter, we will study the following concepts. 1. Mamluk Sultans. 2. Khalji Sultans. 3. The Tughlaq dynasty. 4. The Sayyid and Lodhi dynasty. 5. Life and culture under Delhi Sultanate. Jalaluddin Khalji 1290 to 1296 CE. Jalaluddin Khalji captured the throne after murdering Kaikubad, the last ruler of the slave dynasty. The Turkish nobles found it hard to accept a Khalji as the Sultan of the kingdom, but Jalaluddin proved to be too strong for them. He had another achievement to his credit. He had repulsed a terrible invasion of the Mongols in 1291 CE. Jalaluddin was treacherously murdered by his nephew Alauddin Khalji. Alauddin ascended the throne in 1296 CE. He could not feel secure unless he had subdued his rivals. He sent a force of 40,000 soldiers under Ulugh Khan and Zafar Khan to attack Multan and capture Arkali Khan and Ibrahim, the two sons of Jalaluddin. The princes were defeated and imprisoned at Hansi. They were blinded and later murdered. Thus, Alauddin consolidated his position in Punjab. In order to win over the nobles, he distributed among them the booty which he had received from his Devagiri campaign. Conquest of Gujarat 1299 CE. Alauddin's general Nusrat Khan invaded Gujarat and plundered the flourishing port of Cambay. There, he purchased a Hindu slave named Malik Kafur for 1,000 dinars. Malik Kafur embraced Islam and later extended the Khalji Empire in southern India as well. Conquest of Ranthambore, 1301 CE. In 1301, Alauddin's generals Ulugh Khan and Nusrat Khan laid siege to the fort. Nusrat Khan, along with many Muslim soldiers, was killed in the battle. Ultimately, Alauddin himself took over the command of the army and attacked Ranthambore. The Rajput chief put up tough resistance but was defeated and put to death. Conquest of Chittor, 1303 CE. Alauddin Khalji besieged the fort of Chittor in 1303 CE. The siege was a long-drawn one. In the end, he managed to defeat Rana Ratan Singh and his soldiers who fought to the last man. Conquest of Malwa, 1305 CE. In 1305 CE, Alauddin conquered Malwa, the cities of Ujjain, Mandu, and Chanderi. Thus, by 1305 CE, Alauddin had become practically the master of the whole of northern India. Deccan Conquests, 1307 to 1312 CE. Conquest of Devagiri, 1307 CE. In 1307, Alauddin Khalji sent an army under Malik Kafur against King Ramchandra of Devagiri. The king was defeated, but Alauddin allowed him to rule as a vassal. Devagiri now became the base for Alauddin's further campaigns in the south. Second campaign to Devagiri, 1312 CE. Raja Shankara Deva, the son of Ramachandra, had stopped paying the promised tribute to Alauddin Khalji. Malik Kafur again invaded Devagiri and killed Shankara Deva. This was the last Deccan campaign of Malik Kafur. He had brought the whole of South India under the control of Alauddin Khalji. Warangal, 1309 CE. Its ruler, Prataprudra Deva, offered tough resistance but was defeated. He agreed to pay an annual tribute to the Khalji ruler. Malik Kafur returned to Delhi with an immense booty. Dwar Samudra, 1310 to 1311 CE. Raja Veera Balala III submitted without resistance. Malik Kafur looted and plundered some of the famous temples and came to Delhi with a large quantity of gold, silver, jewels, etc. Campaign of Malabar. Malik Kafur invaded the Malabar coast for its booty. After plundering a lot of wealth, he returned to Madurai. Madurai, 1311 CE. The Pandya king, Veera Pandya, was defeated by Malik Kafur. With a large booty of horses and elephants, he went to Rameshwaram and built a lot of temples before returning to Delhi. Alauddin Khalji's administration. Administrative reforms. Alauddin was a capable administrator. In order to check internal revolts and to keep nobles under his strict control, he introduced several measures. He prohibited the nobles from intermarriages so as to prevent them from making alliances against him. He prohibited them from holding social gatherings or drinking at parties. He thought that such parties gave the nobles opportunities to hatch conspiracies. He established an efficient spy system. Spies, called Khufiya Navis, listened to the bazaar gossips and reported them to the king. This enabled Alauddin to watch the activities of the nobles. He extracted surplus money from the nobles by imposing heavy taxes on them. Alauddin kept a strong and well-equipped army to check external invasions and internal revolts. Economic reforms. Alauddin Khalji was the first Delhi Sultan who took interest in the fiscal and economic reforms in his empire. He needed money to maintain a large army to fight against the Mongols and for the suppression of internal revolts. So, he introduced the following economic and financial reforms to increase his income. Regulation of prices. He issued regulations to control the prices of all commodities of common use such as wheat, barley, rice, cloth, sugar, ghee, etc. He introduced uniform weights and measures throughout the country. Those traders who used false weights and measures to cheat people were severely punished. Control over supplies. All the local producers within 100 miles of Delhi were asked to keep only 10 mounds of grain with them and sell the surplus to the government. Large granaries were built for storing grains. The food grains were supplied to the people at very low rates in times of scarcity. Nobody dared to sell the goods at a rate higher than that fixed by the government. Control over the markets. Alauddin appointed high officials called Shahana-e-Mandi, superintendents of the market, to supervise the markets and enforce market regulations. Rationing system in times of scarcity. Alauddin introduced the system of rationing whenever droughts or famines occurred in any area of his realm. Revenue reforms. Alauddin made useful reforms in the land revenue system. The land under cultivation was measured and land revenue was fixed on the basis of fertility of the land. Land revenue was accepted in both cash as well as kind. He also took measures to end corruption in the collection of land revenue. In addition to land revenue, grazing tax, chari, was imposed when people reared cattle to supplement their income. End of the Khalji dynasty. Alauddin died in 1316 CE. None of his successors was powerful enough to control his empire. Finally, in 1320 CE, a group of nobles led by Ghazi Malik, the governor of Punjab, invaded Delhi and captured the throne. He assumed the title of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq and founded a new line of rulers in Delhi known as the TUGLAQ dynasty.
TUGLAQ dynasty. Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, 1320–24, he laid the foundation of the Tughlaq dynasty. The administrative setup established by Alauddin was destroyed by his successors and Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq stepped in amidst an administrative chaos. Muhammad bin Tughlaq, 1325–1351 AD, Jona Khan with the title of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, one of the most controversial rulers in India, was Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Under his rule, the dynasty spread across the country. He shifted the capital from Delhi to Daulatabad, which harmed his reputation amongst policy makers. Firoz Shah Tughlaq, 1351–1388 AD. After Muhammad Tughlaq, his first cousin, Firoz Tughlaq became the Sultan in 1351 AD. Firoz Tughlaq primarily paid attention to domestic affairs. Later Tughlaqs, 1388–1414 AD. Firoz Tughlaq was succeeded by one of his grandsons, Tughlaq Shah, who assumed the title of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq II 1388 to 89 AD. Within a year, he fell victim to court intrigue and was beheaded. During the next 5 years, three sultans, Abu Bakr, Muhammad Shah and Humayun, titled Alauddin Sikandar Shah, ascended the throne. The last Tughlaq ruler, Nasiruddin Muhammad Shah, 1394 to 1412 AD, faced the invasion of Timur, the great Mongol leader of Central Asia, in 1398. The Tughlaqs belonged to the Turkish origin of Muslim family and remained in power at Delhi for nearly 100 years. Architecture during Tughlaq dynasty flourished under Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. Muhammad Shah Tughlaq ruled from 1325 to 1351, and Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Firoz Shah Tughlaq was a great patron of Islamic architecture. He built the fifth city of Delhi, named as Firoz Shah Kotla. Tughlaqabad, the third city of Delhi, the tomb of Ghiyasuddin, and Khirki Masjid represents the major development of architectures during the Tughlaq dynasty.
The Sayyid dynasty. Before leaving India, Temur had appointed Khizr Khan as the governor of Punjab. In 1414, Khizr Khan marched to Delhi and occupied the throne of the Delhi Sultanate. He laid the foundation of a new dynasty known as the Sayyid Sultans of Delhi. The Sayyid dynasty had 4 rulers in all. Khizr Khan himself, 1414 to 1421, Mubarak Shah, 1421 to 1434, Muhammad Shah, 1434 to 1443, and Alam Shah, 1443 to 1451. During the reign of the Sayyids, Punjab was in turmoil and there were frequent revolts at various places.
The Lodhi dynasty. Bahlol Lodhi, 1451 to 1488 CE. The last ruler of the Sayyid dynasty, Alam Shah, was overthrown by Bahlol Lodhi, the governor of Lahore and Sirhind. Bahlol Lodhi occupied Delhi and founded the new dynasty of Lodhi kings. Sikandar Lodhi, 1488 to 1517 CE. The most capable ruler of this dynasty, Sikandar Lodhi, tried to consolidate his powers by bringing the provincial governors and chieftains under his control. He suppressed the prevailing disorder and, like Balban, attempted to restore the dignity of the court. The roads became safe for travel and trade again flourished. The author of Tarikh-e-Daudi speaks highly of him. But in 1517, Sikandar fell ill and died. Ibrahim Lodhi, 1517 to 1526 CE. Sikandar Lodhi was succeeded by Ibrahim Lodhi. An arrogant ruler, he antagonized the Afghan nobles by his harsh treatment and earned their enmity. Daulat Khan Lodhi, the governor of Punjab, turned against him and declared himself practically independent. He invited Zahiruddin Muhammad Babar, the king of Afghanistan, to invade India and overthrow Ibrahim Lodhi. Babar led as many as 5 expeditions to India during 1519 to 1526 CE. During the 5th and final expedition, Babar defeated Daulat Khan Lodhi. Babar now advanced towards Delhi and reached the town of Panipat. Ibrahim Lodhi also advanced to meet the Mughal invader on the battlefield of Panipat in 1526 CE. Although Babar's army was much smaller in number, but it had fine artillery, Ibrahim Lodhi, along with 15 to 16,000 soldiers, died on the battlefield. Babur won a decisive victory. The Battle of Panipat decided not only the fate of Punjab, but also that of India. The Sultanate rule came to an end, and Babur laid the foundation of the Mughal Empire in India. Economic life. Just like in the ancient period, agriculture was also the main occupation of the masses in medieval India. Firoz Shah Tughlaq took some measures to promote agriculture. He built 5 canals and dug a large number of wells. His irrigation works proved a boon for the peasants. The state also gave loans to the peasants in times of drought and famine. India had overland trade with Central and Western Asia. It was mostly in the hands of Multani Hindu traders. India also had trade relations with the Srivijaya Empire, China, East Africa, and Arabia. The Srivijaya Empire flourished between the 7th and 13th centuries CE. This maritime and commercial kingdom in the Malay archipelago originated on the island of Sumatra and soon came to control the Strait of Malacca. Its power was based on its control of international sea trade. It had relations with other island states and with China and India. It was also a center of Mahayana Buddhism and a stopping place for Chinese pilgrims traveling to India. Internal trade also flourished in the country. In northern India, Delhi was a great center of trade. It was the market for the sale and purchase of goods like rice, sugar, wheat, fine silk, cotton textiles, metalwares, handicrafts, ivory, etc. The necessities of life seem to have been cheaper during the reign of ALAUDDIN KHALJI due to his economic reforms and market controls. Firoz Shah Tughlaq abolished many unjust taxes. This resulted in the growth of trade. Sikandar Lodhi also introduced economic reforms that encouraged trade and industry. Despite all this, the people had to bear the cost of the large army kept by the sultans. Besides, foreign invasions and internal revolts also hampered growth of trade and agriculture at times. Art and architecture. The sultans of Delhi, though not magnificent builders when compared to the Mughal rulers, took a fair amount of interest in architecture. They founded new cities, built palaces, rest houses, bridges, mosques, and tombs. Alauddin Khalji built the city of Siri, and Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq built the city of Tughlaqabad. Firoz Shah Tughlaq built the cities of Hisar, Firoza, and Jaunpur. The famous Adina Masjid at Padua, built by Sikandar Shah, was one of the largest mosques in the Muslim world. The Jama Masjid at Ahmedabad and Mahmud Begara Mosque at Champaner are beautiful and lofty structures. The Quwwat-ul-Islam mosque built by Qutbuddin Aibak is a fine example of the Indo-Muslim style of architecture. The Adhai Din Ka Jhopra mosque at Ajmer was built by Qutbuddin Aibak but was enlarged by Iltutmish. Qutbuddin Aibak also started the construction of the Qutub Minar in Delhi, but it was finally completed by Iltutmish. This magnificent minar was originally 225 feet high and had 4 stories. Firoz Shah Tughlaq was the most magnificent builder of all the Tughlaq rulers. The greatest monument of his reign are Firoz Shah Kotla, Kali Masjid, Lal Gambaz, and his own mausoleum. The most important monument of the Lodhi dynasty is the Maut Ki Masjid built by Sikandar Lodhi. Language and literature. The rulers of the Delhi Sultanate encouraged the study of Persian, the language spoken mostly by the rulers, nobility, and the ulema. Sanskrit was the classical language of the Hindus, but was spoken only by highly learned Hindus. The Bhakti movement led to the growth of different regional languages such as Marathi, Gujarati, Hindi, Punjabi, Bengali, Kannada, Tamil, and Telugu. Many Sanskrit books were translated into regional languages. Persian, being the court language, was important for both the Muslims and the Hindus. Both the communities contributed to the growth of Persian literature. Amir Khusro, nicknamed the Parrot of India, belonged to this age. He was a famous author and poet who wrote in Persian, Hindi, and Urdu. Besides, famous historians like Minhaj-ul-Siraj and Ziauddin Barani and traveler Ibn Battuta used Persian to write their accounts about rulers, political events, and the lives of the common people. The evolution of Urdu, a new hybrid language, also took place during the Sultanate period. It was a simple language, understandable by both the Turks and the Indians. The origin of Punjabi literature is also traced to this period. Baba Sheikh Farid sang both in Punjabi and Persian. He was the first Sufi poet who used standard literary Punjabi. The Vijayanagar rulers patronized Sanskrit. The prominent Sanskrit scholars of this age were Ramanuja, Sarthi Mishra, and Jayadeva. The Delhi Sultanate rulers got many Sanskrit works translated into Persian and Arabic. Administration. The Delhi Sultans were despots and enjoyed vast powers. The Sultan's word was law. He could appoint any person to any post and dismiss him according to his own sweet will. He governed with the help of some advisors and ministers. The Sultan was expected to follow the law based on Quran and Islamic tradition. The Qazi and the ulema had a great influence on the administration. But sultans like Balban, ALAUDDIN Khalji, and Muhammad bin TUGLAQ did not give much importance to their views. The power of the Delhi sultans depended on military force. They maintained their power by the sword. War booty was one of the main sources of income for these sultans. The most important of the sultan's ministers were the revenue ministers called the Wazir and Mir Bakshi, or the paymaster of the army. The minister in charge of the military organization was called Diwani-Urs. The Diwani Risalat was the minister of religious affairs. The empire was divided into provinces, subas. The subas were divided into shiks, and shiks into parganas. These parganas were divided into villages. The governor of a province was called the Wali, Mukti, or Subedar. The main duty of the governor was to maintain law and order in the province. The village was the primary unit of local administration. A group of villages was called a pargana. The chief officer of the pargana was called the Emil, who was responsible for the collection of land revenue. The village headman was called Mukaddam or Chaudhary. The Kotwal was the head of the police department of the town. Criminals were given extremely severe punishments during the rule of the Delhi Sultans. The nobility and the courts. The sultans and nobles enjoyed a high standard of living. Most of these nobles came from the Turkish and Afghan families that settled in India. The nobles were very powerful during the Sultanate period. Sometimes they even influenced state policies. The Sultan occupied the most important place. He was the repository of all political, judicial, and military power. Like the Hindu rulers, Every sultan in the Sultanate period built his own palace. Jalaluddin Khalji, 1290 to 1296 CE. Sultan Balban had a dazzling court and protocols which were designed to impress visitors. The Khalji sultans followed the same tradition. Muhammad bin Tughlaq, in fact, took this tradition to unknown heights. Ibn Battuta described how a person who wanted to visit the Sultan had to pass through 3 lofty, heavily guarded gates. He then entered the court of 1,000 pillars, which was a huge hall and decorated with costly materials. This was the place where the Sultan held his public court. Alauddin Khalji, 1296 CE. The Sultan's birthday and the Nowroz, the Persian New Year, were both celebrated with great pomp and splendor. The court was a hotbed of political intrigues, backstabbing diplomacy. The nobles tried to ape the ostentatious living of the sultans. They lived in magnificent palaces, wore costly apparel, and were surrounded by a large body of servants, slaves, and retainers. The Sultan continued the early system of granting land and villages to an officer in lieu of paying him a salary. The grant was not hereditary and could be transferred. But when the central authority became weak, the grant usually came to be regarded as hereditary. Although Alauddin Khalji repressed the ostentatious living of the nobles, they made up lost ground under the Tuglaqs. During the Tuglaq period, a number of nobles were able to amass large fortunes. The sultans and the nobles built gardens, orchards, markets, etc. Thus, during the Sultanate period, a new class of landed gentry began to develop. The breakup of the Delhi Sultanate towards the beginning of the 15th century brought this trend to an abrupt halt.